The wind howled across the barren hills as the veteran limped toward the old observatory, his faithful German shepherd, wounded but determined, leading the way. The dome ahead glimmered faintly under the setting sun, cracked, abandoned, and whispered to be cursed. Locals said anyone who entered never came out the same, but Rex barked once sharply as if urging him on. Mark hesitated, his breath misting in the cold air. Then he saw it, a flicker of light through the shattered glass window like something alive. He tightened his grip on Rex's leash. "You really want to go in there, don't you, boy?" The shepherd limped forward. Whatever waited inside that observatory was about to change their lives forever. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The sun dipped low over the rugged spine of the Silver Point Hills, painting the horizon in bruised shades of orange and violet. The land was silent, almost too silent. No birds, no wind, only the crunch of gravel beneath Mark Lawson's boots. The retired Marine had walked this trail countless times since he moved to the edge of town. Yet every time he glanced toward the distant dome on the ridge, a chill crawled down his spine. The locals called it the Silver Point Observatory. To them, it wasn't just abandoned, it was cursed. They said strange lights appeared there on moonless nights, pulsing like a dying heartbeat. Hikers spoke of whispers that carried through the valley, calling them by name. Some claimed to see figures moving in the cracked windows, shadows of people long gone. Mark didn't believe in ghosts. He'd seen worse things in war. But even he couldn't explain the uneasy pull that place had on him, like it was watching. He paused at a wooden sign, half buried in dirt. Silver Point Observatory, U.S. Astronomical Facility, closed since 1989. Rust had eaten through most of the letters. Behind it, the structure loomed, its metal dome dented, glass panels shattered, cables hanging like veins from its sides. It had once been a place of discovery, where scientists mapped the heavens. Now it looked like a tomb. Mark exhaled slowly, his breath misting in the cold air. Ever since his discharge, he'd come here seeking solitude, trying to quiet the noise in his head. The hills were peaceful, except for nights when the light returned. He'd seen it once years ago, a single flash at the top of the dome followed by silence. He'd brushed it off as lightning. But lately that silence felt heavier. A faint breeze stirred the dry grass around him, carrying a distant sound, like a low hum. Mark frowned. There shouldn't have been any power up there. His instincts, sharpened by years of service, told him to turn back. But something deep within whispered otherwise. He adjusted the strap of his backpack and started down the path toward home. As the last rays of sunlight vanished behind the hills, he cast one final glance toward the observatory. For the briefest moment. He could have sworn he saw a flicker of orange light behind the broken glass. The following morning, the sky hung heavy with fog, the kind that muffled sound and blurred the line between earth and sky. Mark tightened his flannel jacket and started his daily hike through the narrow ridge trail, hoping to clear his mind. The nightmares had returned again. Faces of men he couldn't save, echoes of explosions he couldn't forget. Out here, among the rocks and wind, the world was quiet enough to let him breathe. Halfway down the path, something broke that silence, a faint whimper carried by the wind. Mark froze, scanning the slope below. There it was again, weaker this time, a sound that tugged at his instincts. He climbed down the uneven rocks, boots crunching on gravel, until he spotted a patch of brown and black fur tangled in the dry grass. A German shepherd lay on its side, one leg wrapped in an old bloodied bandage. The dog's chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, and its eyes, sharp, golden, and pained, locked onto his. Mark knelt carefully, speaking in a low, steady voice. "Easy, boy. I'm not going to hurt you." The shepherd growled softly, more from fear than aggression, before whimpering again. Mark noticed a broken collar around its neck, the tag missing. There were scratches across its side, bruises along the ribs. Someone had hurt this dog or left it to die. His gut twisted at the sight. He'd seen soldiers like this, wounded, abandoned, still fighting to hold on. "You're a tough one," he murmured. He reached into his backpack, pulling out a canteen and pouring a small stream of water near the dog's muzzle. The shepherd sniffed, then lapped weakly. After a moment of hesitation, Mark slid off his jacket, gently wrapping it around the trembling body. "All right, buddy. Let's get you home." He lifted the dog into his arms, grunting as the weight pressed against his chest. The shepherd didn't fight. It simply rested its head against his shoulder, too exhausted to resist. By the time Mark reached his cabin, the fog had thickened, curling like smoke around the treetops. Inside, he laid the dog by the fireplace, cleaned the wound, and replaced the dirty bandage with a fresh one from his old medic kit. The shepherd's tail gave a faint thump against the floor. It wasn't much, but it was gratitude. Mark leaned back on his heels, watching the firelight flicker across the dog's face. "Guess it's just you and me now," he whispered. The shepherd's eyes fluttered open, meeting his with something almost human. Trust. For the first time in months, Mark felt the weight on his chest ease just a little. Days turned into weeks, and the quiet cabin in the Silver Point Hills slowly became home to two souls who had both seen too much pain. The German shepherd's strength returned with surprising speed. His wounds healed, his coat regained its shine, and though a faint limp remained, it didn't seem to slow him down. Mark named him Rex, after a canine partner he'd once served alongside overseas, a dog who never came back. Each morning, they walked the ridge together. The once empty trail now echoed with the sound of steady footsteps and the soft jingle of Rex's new collar. Mark noticed how Rex always walked half a step ahead, glancing back every few seconds to make sure his human was still there. It was a silent understanding, two soldiers keeping pace in a world that had forgotten them. At night, when the fire crackled and the wind howled outside, Rex would rest his head on Mark's boot, while the veteran read old journals or stared into the flames. Sometimes the memories crept in. Gunfire, screams, the weight of comrades lost. Those were the nights when Mark woke drenched in sweat, gasping for air. But every time, without fail, Rex was there. The shepherd would nudge his arm, letting out a soft whine, grounding him back to the present. One evening, Mark sat on the porch, watching the last streaks of daylight fade behind the hills. Rex lay beside him, ears twitching at the distant calls of night birds. Mark took a slow breath and spoke quietly, more to the stars than to anyone else. "You know, I had a son once," he said. "He wanted to be a pilot. Lost him years ago. After that, I didn't see much point in talking." He gave a small, sad smile. "Guess I'm doing that now, huh?" Rex lifted his head, eyes glimmering in the dim light as if he understood. Mark reached down, scratching behind his ear. "You're a good listener, buddy." From that day forward, something changed. The veteran no longer walked with the hollow stare of a man haunted by ghosts. The shepherd's loyalty gave him purpose again, routine, companionship, and the faint echo of life returning. Together they rebuilt what the world had taken from them. Neither of them knew it yet, but fate was already leading them toward something far greater. Something waiting beyond the hills, beneath the cracked dome of a long-forgotten observatory. It was a cold afternoon when Mark and Rex stopped by Millie's Diner, the only place in Silver Point that still brewed coffee strong enough to wake the dead. The bell above the door jingled as they stepped in, drawing a few curious glances. Mark wasn't much of a talker, but in a town this small, a veteran with a German shepherd limping beside him was bound to turn heads. Millie, a plump woman with kind eyes, poured him his usual black coffee. "Haven't seen you in a while, Mark," she said. "Still hiking up those hills?" He nodded, scratching Rex's neck. "Keeps the mind clear." Her expression darkened slightly. "Just stay away from that old observatory. Folks say strange things been happening again." At the far end of the counter, a grizzled rancher leaned forward. "Saw the lights 2 nights ago," he muttered. "Orange flicker. Same as back in '89 before that scientist vanished." Mark frowned. "Vanished?" "Yep, Dr. Harold Ketterman. He ran that place. One night the power grid spiked. Neighbors said they heard a scream from the dome. Cops went up next morning and found the equipment fried. No body. Just scorch marks and a busted telescope." Another man chimed in, voice low and uneasy. "Some say he was trying to talk to something up there. A signal from the stars. Others say whatever answered never left." Rex let out a low growl, his fur bristling. The room went still for a heartbeat. Mark gave the dog a calming pat but couldn't shake the tension crawling up his spine. He had dismissed ghost stories his whole life, yet something about the way the men spoke, quiet, fearful, certain, made him uneasy. Millie crossed her arms. "It's cursed, Mark. People go up there and come back different, if they come back at all." Mark sipped his coffee. eyes narrowing toward the window where the hills loomed faintly in the distance. "Cursed or not," he said, "some things deserve to be seen before you believe them." Rex's tail flicked once. Outside, thunder rumbled far beyond the horizon, as if warning them both that curiosity sometimes came with a price. That night, a storm gathered above Silver Point. The wind howled through the trees and rain lashed against the cabin windows like shards of glass. Mark sat by the fire, polishing the metal tag on Rex's collar, when a sudden bark shattered the calm. Rex stood rigid by the window, his fur bristling, eyes fixed toward the hills. "What is it, boy?" Mark asked, rising to his feet. But Rex didn't move. He barked again, sharper, urgent this time. Mark followed his gaze and froze. Through the sheets of rain high above the ridge, a faint orange glow pulsed from the direction of the observatory. For a moment, Mark thought it was lightning reflecting off the dome, but the color was wrong. It flickered in rhythm, almost deliberate, like a heartbeat. His pulse quickened. He hadn't seen that light since the night of his son's final deployment. The same eerie glow that had hovered above the observatory before the blackout. Rex let out a low growl. Pacing by the door, nails clicking on the wooden floor, the veteran grabbed his flashlight and raincoat, instinctively reaching for the old sidearm he hadn't touched in years. "You really want to go out there, don't you?" he muttered. Rex barked once, firm and certain. That was all the answer he needed. They stepped into the storm. The night was alive with thunder and wind, the kind that drowned out every sound except the pounding of your own heart. Mark's flashlight beam sliced through the darkness, catching glimpses of twisted trees and glistening rocks. Rex moved ahead, guided by instinct, never hesitating even as the rain soaked his fur. When they reached the base of the hill, the light grew stronger, no longer faint but pulsing in waves that illuminated the wet grass and skeletal trees around them. Mark felt the hairs on his arms rise. It wasn't electrical. It was something else, something that hummed through the air and settled deep in his chest. Rex stopped suddenly, ears flat, eyes locked on the dome ahead. Mark squinted through the storm. The observatory stood like a giant wounded eye against the sky, its shattered panels glowing from within, each flash revealing the twisted metal of the collapsed roof. The wind carried a faint sound then, like whispers layered over static. Mark's throat tightened. "It's just the wind," he told himself. But deep down he knew better, because as the next flash came, he could swear he saw a shadow moving inside the dome. The storm had eased into a cold drizzle by the time Mark and Rex began their ascent toward the observatory. The night air clung heavy with mist, each breath visible in the beam of the flashlight. The trail was steep and narrow, littered with slick stones and twisted roots that caught at Mark's boots. Rex led the way, limping slightly but determined, his nose low to the ground as if following something unseen. Mark's heart pounded in rhythm with his steps. Every so often he'd glance back, half expecting to see another light following them through the fog. But there was nothing, only the whisper of rain and the echo of his own breathing. Still, something about the silence didn't feel natural. Even the crickets had gone quiet. "Easy, boy," he murmured, voice low. "We're almost there." The flashlight flickered as he spoke, dimming, then flaring back to life. He smacked the side of it with his palm and the beam steadied, but now he wished it hadn't. Up ahead, the mist had parted just enough to reveal the observatory on the ridge, looming like a great beast against the sky. Its metal dome glistened wet, and for a moment it seemed to pulse faintly from within. Rex stopped, tail stiff, growling deep in his throat. His body was tense, hackles raised. Mark followed his gaze and froze. A figure, tall, motionless, stood near the observatory gate. It was too dark to see details, just a shape against the orange glow. Mark blinked, heart hammering, and the figure vanished. He swallowed hard, forcing a breath. "Just the shadows," he whispered, though he didn't believe it. The last stretch of the climb was the hardest. Rocks shifted underfoot and cold wind bit through his jacket. Every step closer, the hum in the air grew stronger, a low, vibrating sound that Mark could feel in his bones. It reminded him of the generators on the battlefield before a drone strike, an electric anticipation of something inevitable. When they finally reached the ridge, the world seemed to hold its breath. The light had vanished now, leaving only the cracked dome before them, silent and still. Water dripped from its sides, echoing like soft footsteps in the dark. Rex pressed close to his leg, eyes fixed on the heavy metal door at the entrance. Mark exhaled, gripping the flashlight tighter. "All right, partner," he whispered, voice barely steady. "Let's find out what's waiting inside." The observatory loomed before them, its rusted dome silhouetted against the storm-lit sky like a sleeping giant. The metal walls groaned in the wind, and every gust carried a faint echo that almost sounded like a whisper. Mark and Rex stopped at the base of the crumbling staircase leading to the main door. The steps were slick with moss and rain, each one creaking under the veteran's boots. Mark raised his flashlight. The door hung slightly ajar, its once polished steel eaten away by rust. The hinges moaned as the wind pushed against it, creating a slow, rhythmic creak that crawled under the skin. A faded emblem above the arch still read, "Silver Point Research Division." Rex sniffed the ground, then the air, tail rigid and body tense. He emitted a low growl, his gaze locked on the thin gap of darkness beyond the doorway. Mark crouched beside him. "Smell something?" he whispered. Rex's ears flicked forward, but he didn't move. Instead, he stared into that narrow slit like he was waiting for something to come out. The flashlight's beam cut through the doorway, landing on a long corridor inside. Dust hung thick in the air, swirling in the light like ash. Broken glass glinted from the floor, and the walls were lined with corroded pipes that hummed faintly, as if something deep inside still carried power. Mark's heartbeat quickened. "Place should have been dead for decades," he muttered. Yet beneath that hum he could hear something else, a faint, irregular tapping echoing through the hall like fingers drumming on metal. Rex took a cautious step forward. The sound stopped. The veteran exhaled, his breath visible in the cold. He pushed the door open wider, the rusted hinges shrieking in protest. The noise echoed through the building, bouncing off unseen walls until it faded into nothing. For a moment all was still. Then, somewhere in the distance, a light flickered. A single weak bulb buzzed to life, casting a dim orange glow down the corridor. Mark exchanged a look with Rex. "Looks like someone left the lights on," he murmured. The shepherd let out one sharp bark and stepped inside first. Mark followed, the door closing behind them with a slow, echoing clang that sounded disturbingly final. The beam from Mark's flashlight swept across the dusty floor, catching the edges of broken glass and twisted cables. The air was thick with age and decay, every breath carrying the metallic tang of rust. Water dripped from the ceiling, echoing through the vast dome like the slow tick of a forgotten clock. Rex's paws padded softly beside him, claws scraping against the cold tile. The dog's ears twitched with every sound, every drop, every creak of the wind against the metal walls. His instincts were sharp, alert, as though he could sense something human eyes could not. They moved deeper into the observatory. Old control panels lined the walls, their dials frozen mid-measurement, lights long dead. Mark ran his hand over one of the consoles, brushing off a thick layer of dust to reveal a plaque. Astrophysics Department, Dr. Harold Ketterman, lead engineer. The name sent a chill down his spine. It was the same man the townsfolk said had vanished. In the center of the dome stood what remained of the great telescope. Its massive frame leaned at an awkward angle, the lens cracked down the middle. The glass reflected the flashlight in warped fragments, creating ghost-like shapes that shimmered across the walls. Mark stared into the fractured lens, his reflection split and distorted. "Guess the stars stopped talking," he muttered under his breath. Rex sniffed the base of the telescope and barked once, short and sharp. Mark followed, crouching beside him. There, half hidden beneath the metal casing, was a stack of yellowed photographs scattered across the floor. He picked one up and squinted. It showed a group of scientists posing in front of the observatory years ago, smiling proudly, but something about the photo was off. In the background, through the window, a faint orange light glowed, exactly like the one they'd seen tonight. Mark's pulse quickened. Another photo showed the same team, this time standing beside a military officer. Scribbled on the back in faded ink were the words, "Project Echo, Communication Beyond the Spectrum." Rex let out a low whine. Somewhere above them, a soft creak resonated through the dome, followed by a faint metallic clang like a footstep. Mark's grip tightened on the flashlight. He turned slowly toward the staircase that spiraled up into darkness. "Looks like we're not alone, boy," he whispered. Rex growled low, eyes fixed on the shadows above, waiting for them to move. The metallic creak from above faded. leaving behind a silence thick enough to hear the echo of Mark's heartbeat. He scanned the upper balcony once more with his flashlight. Nothing. Just the tangled shadows of broken railings and scattered equipment. But Rex wasn't convinced. The shepherd's nose pressed against the floor near the telescope's base, sniffing intently. His tail stiff, ears twitching. "What is it, boy?" Mark whispered, crouching beside him. Rex began pawing at a section of the metal floor, claws scraping against something hollow beneath. The sound was faint but distinct, a hollow echo different from the solid steel surrounding it. Mark frowned, tapping the spot with his knuckles. It rang back like an empty drum. He brushed away dust and debris until his fingers found a rectangular outline, a hidden hatch, nearly invisible under decades of grime. A small lever protruded from one corner, rusted but intact. Mark hesitated. His instincts told him not to open it, but curiosity had long since replaced caution. "All right, let's see what secrets you've got buried down here." The hatch groaned as he pulled, releasing a rush of cold, stale air. A narrow staircase descended into darkness, the scent of damp concrete and machine oil rising up to meet them. Mark angled his flashlight downward. The steps led into a small underground room, walls lined with shelves, old filing cabinets, and the faint glint of metal equipment. They descended carefully, Rex leading as always. The floor below was covered in dust thick enough to muffle their footsteps. On the far wall, an array of old machinery stood silent. Wires dangling, screens cracked, buttons labeled with faded numbers. Mark's light passed over a dusty workbench littered with notebooks, diagrams, and strange mechanical components. He picked up one of the journals. The cover read in bold, hand-stamped letters, "Project Echo, Phase 3. The pages inside were filled with sketches of wave patterns, brain diagrams, and coordinates. A chill rippled down his spine as he flipped through them. Many of the entries were signed by Dr. Harold Ketterman. Rex sniffed the air again, letting out a low growl. Something about the room felt wrong, too cold, too still. Then, near the back corner, Mark noticed a small monitor flicker weakly to life. Static crawled across the screen, forming brief shapes that looked almost human before dissolving into snow. Mark stepped closer, heart pounding. "This place isn't abandoned," he muttered. Behind him, the hatch door slammed shut. The sound echoed like thunder. The sound of the hatch slamming reverberated through the underground chamber, shaking a thin layer of dust from the ceiling. Mark spun around, flashlight slicing through the darkness, heart pounding in his chest. "Who's there?" he barked, voice echoing off concrete walls. No answer. Only the faint hum of unseen machinery and the slow rhythmic drip of water. Rex stood rigid beside him, fur raised, gaze locked on the flickering monitor. The screen flared suddenly, static morphing into faint images. A laboratory, scientists moving about, and a glowing symbol etched on the back wall. Then a voice crackled through the old speaker, distorted but unmistakably human. "Project Echo. Test sequence commencing." The feed dissolved into static again, leaving behind a single line of text that burned bright before fading. "Memory channel activation. Veteran neural sync." Mark's brow furrowed. Neural sync? What the hell were they doing here? He turned toward the open journals, flipping through the pages with trembling hands. They were filled with equations, diagrams of the human brain, and notes scrawled hastily in the margins. Subject exposure, consistent auditory hallucinations. Signal response linked to PTSD triggers. Communication successful at Aero 247. Unknown source. A chill ran through him. The pieces started to connect. The observatory, the soldiers, the lights. This wasn't about astronomy. It was about psychological frequency mapping. Experiments meant to tap into the subconscious minds of trauma survivors. The observatory hadn't just studied stars. It had used satellite arrays to transmit and receive human neural frequencies. Rex nudged one of the drawers open with his paw. Inside lay a stack of black and white photos, soldiers strapped to metal chairs, wires running from their temples to a glowing console. Their faces were twisted in agony. One of the photos made Mark's breath catch. The uniform patch Marine Recon Unit 12 was the same as his son's. He froze. His hand trembled as he pulled the photo closer. The date at the bottom read June 12, 2007, the night his son's unit disappeared during a classified mission overseas. The air in the room seemed to thicken, heavy and electric. Rex whimpered softly, pressing close to Mark's leg. The veteran's thoughts spun. Could it be that the observatory had somehow recorded fragments of those soldiers' minds? Was that what the light was? Echoes of the past replaying across time and frequency? Before he could process further, the monitor flickered again. This time, words appeared in bright red across the screen. Subject recognized, connection initiated. A high-pitched tone filled the room, vibrating the walls. Rex barked, ears flattened, growling at the machine. Mark stumbled backward as the lights around the consoles began to flare, one by one like something awakening after years of sleep. Then, through the static and noise, a faint voice broke through the speakers. It was hoarse, weak, but familiar. "Dad? Can you hear me?" For a long, shuddering moment, Mark couldn't breathe. The voice, broken, faint, and trembling, echoed through the small underground chamber like a ghost trapped in the wires. "Dad?" It repeated, weaker this time, followed by a burst of static that made the monitor flicker violently. Mark's throat tightened. "No," he whispered. That's not possible. His son had been gone for over a decade, lost during a mission no one could explain. There hadn't even been a body to bury. Rex barked sharply, snapping him out of the haze. The lights overhead flickered again, pulsing in rhythm with the static on the screen. The air thickened, humming with invisible energy. Loose papers swirled around the room as if caught in a storm. Mark stepped back, shielding his face from the sudden rush of cold air that seemed to come from nowhere. The hum rose in pitch, almost screaming. Then abruptly everything went still. The hum cut off. The lights froze. The monitor went black. Only the faint buzz of electricity remained. Mark's heart pounded against his ribs as he scanned the room. "Show yourself," he shouted. His voice echoed back, swallowed by the concrete. A faint shuffle came from behind one of the filing cabinets. Rex growled low, teeth bared, body tense like a spring ready to snap. The flashlight beam trembled in Mark's hand as he turned it toward the sound. The beam caught movement, a shadow slipping along the wall, formless and fluid. It wasn't walking. It was gliding. Mark raised his weapon instinctively. "Stay back," he warned. But the shadow didn't stop. It flickered once, then twice, each time growing sharper, darker. Rex lunged forward, barking fiercely, trying to place himself between Mark and the shape. The temperature dropped instantly. Even their breath turned to mist. The figure stopped near the center of the room. Then the monitor crackled back to life, bathing the space in a pale blue light. On the screen appeared a recording, grainy footage of soldiers in a field, their radios blaring static. One of them turned toward the camera. For a split second, Mark saw his son's face. "Dad, if you ever find this..." The voice broke into static again. The words dissolving. Rex whined, ears flattened, pacing restlessly. Mark's hand trembled as he reached out toward the monitor. The image pulsed once more, then vanished completely, leaving only their reflections staring back from the dark screen. And in that reflection, behind his own shoulder, someone else was standing. Mark spun around, heart pounding, flashlight trembling in his grip. But the space behind him was empty. Only dust motes drifted through the cold air. Rex barked sharply, circling the area, nose pressed to the ground, searching for the scent that wasn't there. The silence that followed felt heavier than the darkness itself. Mark's pulse thudded in his ears. Whatever he'd seen, whatever was standing behind him, had vanished without a trace. Then out of nowhere, the monitor flared again. This time, it didn't show static or flickering images. It showed a timestamp, June 12, 2007. The same date that haunted Mark's memory, the night his son's platoon disappeared. He froze, eyes locked on the screen. The video began to play. Through the distortion, soldiers appeared, mud-soaked, exhausted, moving through a storm of dust. Their radios crackled, voices panicked. "Command, we're losing the signal." "The frequency's spiking again," one shouted. In the chaos, a young man turned toward the camera. Mark's breath caught in his throat. It was his son, alive, terrified, and speaking directly into the lens. "If anyone finds this, the signal, it's not from the enemy. It's coming from here," the young man said, his voice breaking. He pointed off screen. "They told us to activate the array at Silver Point. Said it was for communication tests, but it's not." His words cut off in a flash of light. The image trembled violently, then froze. Mark's knees weakened. "Oh, God," he whispered, stepping closer. "They used you." His voice cracked, grief and fury blending into one. The recording flickered again and faint audio returned, a final message barely audible beneath the static. "Dad, If you ever hear this, it means the signal survived. Don't let it call again. Shut it down. The screen went dark. Mark stood frozen, tears welling in his eyes. His son's voice, the one he thought he'd never hear again, still echoed in his head. Rex pressed against his leg, whining softly, sensing the shift in his handler's heartbeat. Mark knelt beside him, gripping the dog's fur as if anchoring himself to reality. They didn't die out there, he murmured. They were pulled into this experiment. His gaze shifted toward the glowing wires still faintly humming along the walls. Whatever had happened inside this observatory all those years ago hadn't ended. It was still alive, waiting for someone to finish what they started. And tonight, somehow, it had called him here. The walls of the observatory pulsed with a low vibration, like a living heartbeat buried beneath the concrete. Mark stood frozen in front of the dead monitor, his son's final words, "Shut it down," echoing in his mind. The realization hit him like a sledgehammer. The signal wasn't just technology, it was alive, feeding off energy, pulling memories from those who carried the pain of war. That was why it called to him, why it called to Rex. The dog whined, pacing near the humming equipment, his ears twitching at frequencies Mark couldn't hear. Then Rex stopped suddenly, body stiff, staring toward the staircase that led back up to the dome. His growl started low, uneasy, primal. Mark followed his gaze and saw it, a faint ripple in the air like heat distortion moving slowly down the steps. "Back!" Mark barked instinctively, stepping between Rex and the shimmer. But the ripple thickened, forming something darker, a shape twisting and folding in on itself like smoke given weight. The air grew icy cold. The humming turned into a pulse, rhythmic and suffocating. Rex barked furiously, his hackles raised, but the moment he lunged, the ground trembled. A loud crack split through the room. The ceiling beam above them had fractured, groaning under unseen pressure. Mark's instincts kicked in. "Move, Rex," he shouted, diving to the side. But the shepherd didn't move. Instead, he turned, sprinting straight toward Mark, slamming into him with all his strength just as the beam gave way. The world exploded in sound and dust. Metal crashed, sparks flew, and the entire left side of the room collapsed in a cloud of debris. Mark hit the floor hard, gasping as the air was knocked from his lungs. The flashlight rolled away, its beam flickering over the rubble. When the dust cleared, Rex was half buried under a section of the broken beam. His body was still, one paw twitching weakly. Mark's heart stopped. "No, no, no, no!" he cried, crawling to his partner's side, pulling debris away with trembling hands. Rex's chest rose shallowly, his amber eyes finding Mark's through the haze. "You saved me again, didn't you, boy?" Mark whispered, his voice breaking. The shepherd gave a faint, rasping sound, half a whine, half a sigh. Mark's hands pressed against his fur, desperate, trembling. "Hang on, Rex. Stay with me." The observatory above groaned again, dust raining down from the ceiling. The faint hum from the equipment began to die, flickering weakly as though Rex's act had disrupted the signal's pulse. Tears blurred Mark's vision. He could feel Rex's heartbeat slowing beneath his hand. "You did good, partner," he whispered through clenched teeth. "You did real good." And as the last light from the machines faded, Rex's breathing steadied. Barely. He had given everything he had to protect the man he'd saved more than once. But the night wasn't done yet. Somewhere beyond the silence, a new light began to rise. The first hint of dawn crept through the shattered glass above, turning the dust in the air into a swirl of pale gold. Mark sat beside Rex, his hands still pressed against the dog's side, feeling the faint rhythm of his heartbeat, weak but present. The room was quiet now. The once menacing hum of the machines had faded into a soft crackle like a dying fire. Whatever power had haunted this place seemed to have finally burned itself out. Mark rose unsteadily to his feet, his flashlight dimming to a final flicker. The beam swept across the debris-strewn floor, catching a faint glimmer from the far side of the room. He squinted and moved closer. There, beneath the cracked dome, stood a tall, dust-covered console that had somehow survived the collapse. A single green light blinked steadily on its surface. As Mark approached, the blinking grew faster until the entire panel lit up, bathing the room in a warm, golden glow. The light climbed the walls, scattering across the broken glass until it refracted upward, projecting patterns across the dome. Slowly, the light converged into a single beam that pierced through the cracked ceiling and reached toward the sky. Mark shielded his eyes. Then through the haze he saw it, names. hundreds of them etched into the inner dome, glowing softly like stars being reborn. Some he recognized from his unit, others from the photos he'd found. Scientists, soldiers, forgotten souls swallowed by the project's secrecy. And among them, one name shone brighter than the rest. Letier's Adam Lawson. Mark's throat tightened. His knees buckled as he stared up at his son's name illuminated in the golden light. "You found peace, didn't you?" he whispered. "You brought us here so it could end." The glow pulsed once more, and a wave of warmth washed through the room. Gentle, forgiving, alive. The oppressive weight that had hung in the air all night lifted, replaced by something pure, almost divine. Rex stirred weakly, his paw twitching as he let out a soft, contented sigh. Mark knelt beside him, tears streaking down his dirt-covered face. "It's over, buddy. We did it." He glanced back at the dome where the beam had begun to fade with the rising sun. "They can rest now." Outside, the first full light of morning broke across the hills of Silver Point, and for the first time in years Mark felt warmth, not just on his skin, but deep within his soul. The curse had never been evil. It had only been waiting to be forgiven. 2 days later, the Silver Point hills were quiet again. The storm had passed, the observatory sealed by authorities who had no idea what had really happened there. To them, it was just another abandoned site with old military equipment. But to Mark, it was sacred ground, where truth, loss, and redemption had finally met. He stood on the ridge just below the observatory, the morning sun spilling gold across the horizon. Beside him, Rex lay resting on a blanket, his injured leg wrapped neatly, eyes half closed but alert. The dog had survived barely. The vet said it was a miracle. Mark didn't call it that. He called it purpose. Mark knelt and dug a small hole in the soft earth near the base of an old oak tree. In his hand, he held the tattered bandage that once wrapped Rex's wound, the one from the day they met. He placed it gently into the ground, covering it with soil. "You've carried my ghost long enough, boy," he said softly. "Time to let them rest." Rex whined, resting his head on his paws as if understanding. The wind stirred, carrying the faint scent of rain and pine. Mark tilted his head toward the sky. The observatory dome gleamed faintly in the distance, sunlight catching the cracked panels just right so that they shimmered like stars. For a moment he imagined the glow of names still etched inside, his sons among them watching over him. He sat beside Rex, running a hand through his fur. "You know," he murmured, "I used to think coming back from war was the hardest thing I'd ever do. Turns out, it was learning how to live again." Rex gave a soft, contented bark, his tail thumping once against the blanket. Mark smiled faintly. "Guess I didn't do it alone, huh?" He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small brass tag engraved with the words, "For Rex, my guardian, my friend." He fastened it to the dog's collar and whispered, "You're not just a hero, buddy. You're my angel." As the sun dipped behind the hills, the first stars appeared overhead, their faint glimmer reflected in Mark's eyes. He exhaled slowly, a peace he hadn't felt in years settling deep inside him. Rex looked up too, ears twitching, eyes fixed on the heavens. Together they sat in silence under the fading light, two survivors bound by loyalty, love, and a promise kept. Because sometimes, angels don't have wings, they have paws.